And good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of producing fantastic products, delicious foods, doing it safely with quality. And a lot of times in what we do in food safety and quality assurance is if we do a good job, it goes unnoticed. And so one of the things we love to do here on the chat, and I know that Jose agrees with me as well, is good job. You did a good job this week, right? And if nobody pats you on the back and tells you that, we're here to tell you that. So good job. You've earned your weekend. So if you're new to the chat, first of all, welcome. Pull up a seat and join us for an hour. We're going to be talking about all things food safety. And what you're going to notice here is that this presentation is not, right? It is not a PowerPoint presentation where we read a bunch of crap to you. This is a conversation. And I am honored to have experts such as Jose Sabal come onto my show and join me for a discussion around these type of topics. And we are here to share this information, provide our expertise, and importantly, answer your questions. So as Cheryl knows, good morning, Cheryl, your input here is what makes this so much fun. So we're really happy that you're here. So if you're new to the chat, you're not going to recognize my guest, but Jose Sabal of Sabal Food Safety Consulting is one of the people I love having on the chat here because he's so knowledgeable. So how are you doing today, Jose?
Very well, and thank you for the flowers. Same to you, by the way.
Yeah, so Jose and I met back when he was doing, and he still does these activities, is training on all these different things relative to food safety, so quality standards and you name it. And Jose's address is here, and we'll bring this up at the end of the chat as well too to see what's new. But if you ever have the chance to take a course with Jose, you're going to get your money's worth because I mean this dude knows his stuff. So as everybody's piling in here, there's so many awesome new faces here. Nice to see you. Austin, good to see you as well. Lance, thank you for joining us here as well. One of the things that we love to do in the chat, so as Cheryl did here, is let us know where you're at in the world. I am in beautiful, going to be rainy today, Loveland, Colorado, which is great, Jose, because man, it's been hot here. And I don't know, should I even ask the question about Southern Florida? Has it been hot?
You have no idea what is hot weather. Because over here, we are not as bad in temperature as, for example, Austin. My daughter is there, and she's telling me, Daddy, 110, 112, 114, and so on, and it's hard. But you know what? It's not as humid as here. So 96 and 98, which is a very typical temperature here, and then you have 70 and 80% humidity, I'm going to tell you something.
Yeah, you walk outside, it's just a wall that just hits you.
Yeah, you hit the wall of the humidity.
Megan, good to see you. Michelle, hi, good to see you as well. Nice to see you too. Allie's out in beautiful San Diego. Very nice. So one of the things that we do here on the chat, guys, if you're familiar with the chat, please join us. If not, if you got something handy, that's great. So please join us.
I got it.
Nice sip of your favorite beverage. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Very good. Very, very good.
Oh, yes.
Do you have a new flavor of tea today, or what's the variety?
Green tea.
Green tea. There you go.
Green tea.
That's one thing that I learned back from my days waiting tables when I was in college at Pizza Huts is when you're coming up to somebody who's eating their food and things like that, your question needs to be closed-ended question. Like, is everything okay, sir? Like, yes or no. So if there's food in their mouth, right, they can just go, right? So my apologies for asking you a question while you were drinking your tea.
No problem.
Hey, Duncan, good to see you. Very nice. Duncan's working on some amazing stuff out there too. So Duncan, remind me here, I'll hit you up. Maybe we'll get you here on the show here in Q4. So, oh my goodness. Normally, like everybody knows, my notes for the chat, we keep it to a page. But here, Jose, we have two solid pages of information to go through here today. So, man, we got to get rocking and rolling. So one of the things that if you're new to the chat about Jose that you're going to learn is he's like me. He's very analytical. He's very methodical. And when he's analyzing something, and this is a good habit to get into for anybody, is he always goes back to the source material first to establish that baseline. So what are the rules? What are the regulations? What are the laws? How does this translate into what we're doing? Which is a great way to always look at everything. And so as we were preparing for this chat on Monday and deciding, well, what do we want to go over this week? The topic of recalls and allergens in particular, and how these are looked at from an FDA classification standpoint. And as we begin here, I want to definitely give a shout out, and I will put the link in here at some point. A lot of this information was gathered through the hard work of Sean Stevens at Food Industry Council. And
Thank you, Sean.
yeah, if you're not familiar with Sean, he's a great food lawyer. And he has, out of his own pocket on his website, put together a searchable database for recalls. And it is such a good tool to use. I think, Jose, I probably find myself using that once or twice every week.
Yeah. Why not? It's very handy.
Let's see. Ali, I don't quite understand the comment. Not a wall, a wet blanket. There's going to be more coming on that, I'm sure. So as we were working on this, it's like, okay, recalls. And this is kind of this, recalls are this amorphous. It's kind of one of those things in life where if you've been through one, oh, you understand it. And if you haven't been through one yet, you will understand it. But you need to have knowledge in advance. So what we tried to do here is give some background and definitions, and then some of the amazing analysis with some really surprising information that Jose put together. So first of all, Jose, we'll start with the basic. What is a recall? What is that?
Okay. So are you sitting there? And the reason for this question is very funny because many people think that there are many cases where, for example, I sent a product to the market that contains a little bit of, for example, food grade grease, food grade oil. Oh, that is not a recall because that is not going to cause illness or injury, which is a hazard. Well, the product is adulterated.
Yeah.
Okay. And people will need to recall the product because of that reason. So official definitions, okay, like you said, Brian, I'm going back to basics. I'm going to definitions and the requirements in laws and regulations. Mm-hmm. Not GFSI right now. Okay, so a recall, and I'm going to read straight, means a firm's removal or correction of a marketed product. That means that you ship the product to the market. The product was shipped, okay? That the Food and Drug Administration will consider in violation of the laws, not the regulations, because the regulations are written to comply with the law. So what you are going to be against is the law. You are not in compliance with the regulation, of course, but you are going to be against the law. And that is the problem.
Yes.
Okay. So which are some of the prohibited acts in the law, in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, Section 331? Receiving product that is adulterated or misbranded is a prohibited act. Mm-hmm. Okay. If a product has a piece of hair, the product is adulterated. Why? Well, number one, hair is not food, so cannot be present. Number one. And number two, even if someone decides to put hair, in the list of ingredients, well, now the product is mislabeled because hair is not food. Okay. So number two, any company working under insanitary conditions is a prohibited act. Mm-hmm. The thing is that it is not, there is nothing that I can tell you to define exactly insanitary conditions. What I'm going to say is, if you have a product and you have a very good product specification, which is not typical. Lots of companies, I read this constantly when I'm going through the hazard analysis of the ingredients, and the specifications that the companies develops are not good. Okay? They do not have all of the information that is really necessary to perform a very good assessment of the potential hazard that the product may have, or some potential hazard that were already controlled by the supplier, by the one that is developing the specification. Now, assuming that you have a very good specification, by the time that the product is going to be shipped, if the product is not in compliance with that specification, the product is adulterated. And I don't care if the content is a hazard that will cause illness or injury, or if the content is something that is not hazardous. For example, if you ship to the market a raw chicken that we know that will contain salmonella, so no issues, but the raw chicken is already in an advanced state of decomposition, the product is adulterated. There you go. That is one of the best examples that we can use.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so of course, if you ship a product to the market that is adulterated or misbranded, of course, it's a prohibited act. Not keeping records that are required by regulations is a prohibited act, because those records belong to the FDA or they belong to the Food Safety Inspection Service. It doesn't matter.
That's an important point to remember, is that your food safety plan is the document that you create to comply with the Food Safety Modernization Act, a law, and the regulations that FDA enforces in relation to that law. So if FDA shows up and says, I want to see your food safety plan, and you go, oh, food safety plan, right? Those are records that you're required to have. And FDA is allowed full access to those records. Yes.
And guess what, Bryan, just to, deviate a little bit from our mainstream of the conversation, is a food safety plan according to the new preventive controls regulation exactly the same as the HACCP plan that is required by GFSI? No. So you could be in full compliance with SQF and BRC and FSSC and IFS and so on, and you're just not in compliance with the regulations applicable to you. You're not in compliance with the laws applicable to you.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Then there's been some letters out there, and you've done some good analysis online for those, and that's a different topic. But a lot of the stands are saying, hey, look at this comparison FDA did with our standard, and we're looking pretty good. Well, yeah, but there's still going to be those differences.
Yeah. Being the letter mentioned that the GFSI, well, at least the schemes that were asking for it, they are aligned. Well, aligned, according to that letter, does not mean that you can perform a GFSI audit and that is going to be good for the FDA. It's not. And it's written in that same letter. Okay. So all of those standards that requested for, a little bit of feedback from the FDA said, well, they're aligned, that they have similar components, but they're not exactly the same. And it is written in that letter. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me go back to our track. So not keeping the records was our last one. That's a prohibited act. Transporting food under unsanitary conditions is a prohibited act. We're breaking the law. And not register a facility that requires registration with any of the agencies of the government is a prohibited act, because in the United States, like in, I will say, most of the countries of the world, I know a few of them, which I'm sure that it's the same thing as in the United States, you cannot produce food unless you are registered with the agency that is handling, the production of food.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, right? And that's a whole nother conversation too. A lot of time food manufacturers in other countries don't understand their registration requirements for selling into the US market.
And believe it or not, when I was auditing in those 9 years of intense auditing, I found, the certification body sent me to a company to perform a gap assessment. And I said, okay, let's go through the legal portion. Are you registered? Well, yeah, we're registered. And they show me the registration with the state. Okay, Are you registered with the FDA? Oh, no, we're not. Okay, so I cannot audit you.
Right.
Sorry. Yeah, because you're not legally, in good standing with the laws and the regulations applicable to you.
Yep.
Okay, so just a copy.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And so as we're kind of looking through our list here as well, kind of the next bucket then is kind of the levels of activity. So there's what's a market withdrawal? Because you hear this term sometimes.
Okay, so that is the next definition that I have here, okay? Official definition of the FDA. What is a market withdrawal? Means the firm's removal or correction of a distributor product, the product was shipped, which involves a minor violation that will not be subject to legal action by the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So what is, at this point, minor violation? Well, you have fundamentally, if you read the intent in the law, if the product is adulterated, it could be adulterated in two ways. One, if the product contains something that is going to cause illness or injury, that's a hazard. Mm-hmm. And the second one, if the product contains something, is not going to cause illness or injury, but is not part of the specification of the product. The product is adulterated.
Yeah. So let's say, for example, that in my product, I added salt by mistake, and it shouldn't be there. It's not going to make anybody sick, but I would want to remove that product from the marketplace.
Yes, because the product contains something that is not part of the specification of the product. Yes.
Right. So, and again, right, as we always kind of go through in this chat as well, right, two main categories: misbranded, adulterated. Those are the two things that FDA always buckets things into. So in that example, to Jose's point, salt is in the product. It's not declared in the product. It's misbranded.
Yep.
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 So,
okay.
Yeah.
So that is a market withdrawal. But there is a third definition of the FDA, okay, which is the stock recovery. And that is something that not too many people know about it. So what is a stock recovery? Well, that is the firm's removal of or correction of a product that has not been marketed. The product is still under the control of the company. Mm-hmm. That is a stock recovery, official definition, okay? And then the FDA says, well, every company should have a recall policy. And we can translate that to our GFSI language as we're supposed to have a recall program. And right. We're supposed to have a team and understand which are the specific responsibilities that we need to follow and comply with the regulation. By the way, in recall, the requirements of GFSI, many of them are pretty much exactly the same as the FDA, but FDA has a bunch of requirements that are not in GFSI. Okay? Just to make sure that the food safety plan is not the same thing, because in GFSI, your recall plan is just another element of the system. In the FDA, you need a recall plan only if in the hazard analysis you identify at least one hazard that requires a preventive control. Otherwise, you don't need it. But in GFSI, you need it no matter what. So They're not the same. And we need to be extremely careful with these little differences, depending on who's visiting us to check, audit, or inspect our food safety system.
Right.
So, what we need to know now, okay, is, well, the next topic, Bryan, is who decides to initiate the recall. Okay?
Uh-huh.
And this is very simple. I mean, if you are performing very effective verifications of your controls in your system, most likely any company is going to identify themselves as, oops, we ship some product that is adulterated to the market, which is a prohibited act. Okay? That's the best approach. Now, the second option is that FDA is out there, and FDA is grabbing products everywhere. And they are sending those products to their own labs, and the labs are testing the products.
Yeah.
And if the product, is identified as having any kind of hazard, in this case, most likely, must be gross to identify something, that is not a hazard, adulteration by a non-hazardous adulterant, something like that, for the lab to identify. But the labs are checking for, hazards mostly. I might be wrong, but that's my take. And of course, this is going to be done by FDA or FSIS. They are doing the same.
Yep. Well, and part of this too is people don't realize as well, Jose, is that states do this as well. So state health agencies will go out to grocery stores. Florida does this, for example. They'll go to Publix and go out to a grocery store and do surveys of products. So they're checking for other regulatory concerns, weights and measures and stuff like this, but also they will test for pathogens in those finished products. So you may get a phone call at your company from a state regulator saying, hey, listen, we tested your product and we found that it's adulterated with a pathogen. You need to recall this product immediately, right? And then all these wheels start in motion. So you can find something internally that will initiate a recall. A regulator may find something. You may get information from consumers, right? Which is one of the reasons why FDA asks questions when they're doing an investigation of, do you have any complaints from consumers? Consumers can also reach out directly to FDA and say, hey, listen, I drank this coffee and I think it made me sick. And FDA will gather that information and look for trends and patterns on that side too. Suppliers, you may get a call from one of your suppliers. Let's say that you're buying flour for one of your products, right? And we've seen these big recalls with flour or peanut butter or things like this where you have an ingredient and they contact you and say, sorry, but that product that we sent you is adulterated. And if you don't have a step in place to remove that risk in your process, then that's going to carry through. And you now have a recall as well, but because of their ingredient. And you'll see these recalls that cascade like this, where a raw material, which is a huge risk for companies, the company thought it was okay, and now there's a large recall because you got caught up in your supplier's recall.
Yep. And I mean, I'm going to deviate a little bit from the class again, Bryan, but look at this. Flour. Is that a raw product? Yes. Similar to chicken. Coming from, yes, it's exactly the same. So can we expect to have Salmonella and E. coli in flour? Of course, yes. It's going to be there. It's coming from the field. So for some time, I was struggling saying, well, then why the FDA is enforcing the recall of flour? It doesn't make any sense. But if you keep on thinking, and actually I'm working with a bakery close by, is a client of mine, and we were going deep into trying to identify what is the problem. The problem is not the raw grain that is coming in. We know that is going to have Salmonella and E. coli. You know what is the problem? That those companies might be working under insanitary conditions. Mm-hmm. So the problem is not the raw product. The problem are the working conditions of the mills that are milling the grain. Yeah. And when the FDA observes those conditions, say, I don't have any problem that the product is raw. I'm okay if it contains a little bit of E. coli and Salmonella. But what is just not acceptable is that you are working that product under these conditions.
Right. Exactly. And part of this too is FDA, and we'll get into this a little bit more later on, but this dovetails nicely with this, is FDA will look at the conditions in which the consumer applies the product. So for example, sticking with our flour example, cookie dough, right? People get sick from cookie dough. And if you're a manufacturer, it's like, well, you're supposed to cook the cookie dough, and that should eliminate the hazard. Well, number one, FDA has said, and this has been stated several times, is that you cannot rely on the consumer for control of your hazard. The other piece of it is FDA looked at this and said, it is a well-known fact that people eat raw cookie dough.
There you go.
And that hazard, that's an additional risk. And so as a result of that, we saw large recalls for cookie dough for E. coli or other type items that may have been present in the product itself.
Yeah. And let me add something else to that approach, Bryan. GFSI is using basic HACCP approach. The classes, when people is teaching classes for HACCP, we always say, you need to be identifying potential hazards and make sure that you use those potential hazards and try to perform a hazard analysis depending on the severity and the likelihood of those hazards to determine if they are going to become significant or not. Mm-hmm. But if you read the literature that is behind the HACCP approach, the literature says also that you are supposed to be looking for likely hazards, not just those that are potential. And what is the big thing? What is the big change with the preventive controls now? That in the definition of potential hazard, potential hazard, the new definition for that, the new name is known or reasonably foreseeable hazard. That's the reason. So, yes.
You should know that, right? That's what FDA is saying. Our good friend Jennifer had a question, Jose. Let's see what you think of this. So she wants to know, what are your thoughts around the not ready to eat corn that was recalled due to consumer testing? I'm not familiar with this one directly. How about you?
I'm not. I will need to read it, Jennifer. That's the first thing that I'm going to say. However, non-ready to eat, great. That product is supposed to have some sort of a specification, what the product is, what is a non-decomposed, non-putrid, which are the ingredients of the products, which I'm going to guess that it's just corn in your case. And if that product was placed on the market and the product is not matching its own specification, well, the product is adulterated.
So I did find here while we're talking, so there was a recall, and this is taking place like as of yesterday. There's a recall of frozen corn for listeria.
Yes. Yep.
So adulterated.
Yes, of course.
And to her point,
hold on, Jennifer. Yes, I read the Twin City Foods recall actually yesterday. Thank you for reminding me. So it's not just corn. It was frozen vegetables. I saw well, they also have a corn in it. But look at this. Look at the list of ingredients. The list of finished goods. And you're going to see that they have different finished goods. And they all are, there is a concern about listeria for all of them. And now what is the conclusion? Very simple. They are not working under sanitary conditions.
Right. And
that's a thing.
Yeah. And doing a quick search here on the web, oh my goodness, this is a big recall. And so there's lots going on here. So my guess is, and again, right, supplier control. So my guess, I don't know at this point, right? This is just my experience to guess, is a supplier of one of the vegetables in there, or maybe multiple vegetables, was contaminated, and now it's spread across all kinds of different vegetable mixes.
Yeah, they were working under in sanitary conditions. That's the reason why the product is recalled. And it doesn't matter that the product is raw. You cannot work under in sanitary conditions, period.
Yeah, and it's also a good lesson. So I'm glad, Jennifer, that you brought this up as well, is that you should not strictly rely on the documentation from your suppliers. It's like, oh no, I have a COA, I'm fine. Really? Are you? You should be doing, and this is going to be a future topic because I've been going through the Listeria guidance document. Even in that guidance document, FDA says you should, depending upon the risk of your materials, do periodic testing yourself to verify that what your suppliers are telling you is true. Have people forged COAs in the past? Yeah, they have.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
These type of activities take place. Or you may not be paying attention and you're getting a COA and you look through the details and you find out that supplier is only doing pathogen testing once a year of 25 grams of material, right? Because testing is expensive and they don't want to do that. Completely insufficient. Right? You need to pay attention to these things.
Bryan, even a monthly test is going to be insufficient.
Right. So these things need to be evaluated, right? Risk, the potential damage to your company, right? So if you're buying lots and lots of frozen vegetables and putting them out in the marketplace, this is mission critical for your business. You better be taking a close look at those things.
Yep.
So I'm at a company, right? And so you need to have, regardless of what regulations or standards say, you need to have a recall procedure, crisis management. You need to test these programs and you need to have a mechanism in place. And one of the ways, Jose, I've always approached this in the past is I look at this type of activity in two phases. And the first phase is evaluation of the risk. So when you are notified of a potential risk, so for Jennifer example here, you get a notice from your supplier and, oh, hey, sorry to tell you this, but we had listeria in a material we sent you, or something like this, is evaluating the data that you have and figuring out, do I really have a situation here where I have a recall? And looking at the data and figuring this out as a team and determining what is your risk. So for example, let's say you get a notice from a supplier that says, hey, we sent you this lot of raw material that's contaminated. If you jump too quickly and say, oh my goodness, we need to recall, and you later find out the next day that you never received that lot, too late. The recall wheels have already started. And even though it wasn't an actual recall, you now have a recall. You've seen horror stories in the past of companies that are doing mock recall exercises with their suppliers or their customers, and the customers misunderstand, and it becomes a real recall because the customer thinks it's a real recall. Yes. So you have to be very, very careful. And one of the absolute rock solid rules on this, and you need to write this down and understand this because I've learned this from painful experience myself, is in that particular moment in time, you have very limited data, which may or may not be correct, it may or not be complete, and you have to make decisions on what you know at that point in time.
Yes.
That context is critical. And sometimes as that evaluation of the potential risk of an issue comes into play, just being able to go, okay, what do I know and what do I don't know? Do not panic. And part of what's important to remember on this, and anybody who's on the call here who's head of food safety in the company understands this, you are the face of the issue, right? Within your company, everyone is looking to you to lead the company through the issue. If you panic and you're running around like this, and everybody else is going to feed off that energy, and it's going to become chaos. You need to be the voice of reason, and you need to set up in advance people to assist you with this activity. So Sean Stevens at Food Industry Council, for example, other good food safety lawyers out there, I can give recommendations for other people as well. You need to establish relationships with them in advance. So let's say, for example, Jose, now you go through this exercise, your crisis management team reviews this, and you're like, yeah, we have an issue. The next step then, of course, is you need to let FDA know, right? Assuming other parameters, interstate commerce and things like this that we haven't talked about. But you then need to go into the reportable food registry, right?
Yep. Which, by the way, it's mandatory.
Yes.
Okay. Now, is that in GFSI? No.
Another example.
There you go. Another one. Okay. So now, Bryan, look at this. In the strategy for recall, according to regulations, requirements in the regulation, these are not requirements in GFSI, by the way. Okay. So if in your hazard analysis, you identified at least one hazard that will cause illness or injury, and you need a special preventive control or any kind of control for that, you must have a recall plan that is in compliance with the requirements of the FDA. Okay. One of the requirements of the FDA is that you have a strategy. And part of that strategy is that you need to understand the classification of the recalls.
Right.
Okay. So a class 1, most likely, according to, I have the exact text of the definition here, is something that is going to cause serious adverse health consequence or death. So you can think Sakota hazard.
Yeah.
So death is the key here, because the class 2 is that the probability of having a serious adverse health consequence is remote. Still is a hazard, but it's remote to cause death. Hospitalization and illness, yes. Still is very serious, but a class 3 recall is when it's a situation in which the use of or exposure to a product that is in violation with a regulation, but with the law, is not likely to cause adverse health consequence. What is that? The product is adulterated with hair. The product is adulterated with food grade grease. The product is adulterated because it's a little bit decomposed, or a little bit, there is a section of the, I don't know, the lettuce that is a little bit putrid or decomposed, something like that. Well, the product is adulterated. You cannot have that product in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's a little zinger that most people don't know is who determines the classification of the recall?
Okay. So
FDA.
now look at this.
Yeah.
Yes. The companies are supposed to have some wording, some basic understanding of the classification of the recalls. And when the company says, oops, we sent some product to the market, you need to understand what kind of adulteration is in that product. And the companies are supposed to determine what will be the classification of the recall. And when you contact the FDA, you'll say, FDA, I sent this product to the market with listeria, and I'm saying that that is a class 1. Mm-hmm. FDA will say yes or no to our approach in industry. They have the last word, but we are supposed to say, according to our assessment, what is the potential classification. Now, in order to categorize, the seriousness of the recall, the classification, there are basically 4 main components, and I will say 2 that are kind of related to one of them. One of the ways that one of the factors that you need to address when trying to determine the classification is if there is people already getting sick. Right. Okay. If there is no people getting sick, it is the responsibility of those that are evaluating the condition to make sure that we address the severity of the hazard, and we guess if someone consumes our product with this hazard, what is going to be the seriousness of the consequence? Is that person going to die? Right. Is that person going to, maybe get to a hospital or maybe just stay home for a few days and the person is going to get well? I don't know, but that is part of our assessment. And then we need to determine who are the consumers. What is the intended use and the consumers of the product? Because whenever we say, Bryan, general population, oh my, we're including those 4 groups of people that most likely are the ones that will suffer severe consequences. Right. Okay. And the last one is our typical risk assessment, severity and likelihood. Mm-hmm. What is that? That is your hazard analysis. So if you ship a product to the market that is adulterated and you have no clue where was the source or what was the source of that hazard, when the product is being returned, your root cause analysis is going to start blank because you have no clue why you sent that product to the market adulterated. And that is an indication that the food safety plan is not working. Right. Make sense?
Yeah. And so this is why having a robust food safety plan is so important. So from the mechanism standpoint of this, okay, so you identify a risk, you go into the reportable food registry and you put in your information in there. Where does that go? That goes to the regional office within FDA for their different districts that you are based in. So it's based upon where you are located, and it goes to that office. So let's say, for example, you're in California, it's going to go to the San Francisco regional district office.
Yep.
And at each office is a person who is responsible for crisis coordination. So for recall management, it's on the FDA's website, and it lists out by all these different areas who that main person is who's responsible for that. My advice is get to know that person. Who are they, right? You need to understand this. The last thing you want to do is you have an oh crap crisis going on and you don't know any of this stuff. And you're on the internet trying to search this and find this information. The wrong time to be figuring this out. So the reportable food registry is filed. You reach out to the region, you talk with the crisis manager, and they're going to start asking you exactly what we're doing right now. Okay, what is the product? Is it in interstate commerce? Why does the FDA ask that? There's a very specific reason, right? They're establishing a regulatory authority. And they will start asking questions to your point, Jose. Where is the product manufactured? How much was made? What is the intended consumer? What are the hazards associated with this? How did you find out about this? On and on and on and on, right? So FDA is going through and figuring out this risk. So as we've saw, here within the last year, so Coronabacter in infant formula, right? So target market, babies. Oh my goodness, one of the biggest risk groups out there, right? FDA is going to react very strongly to this. And then FDA is going to take this information and then use this to classify this particular recall. And they're going to say, we want you to write a recall notification. We want you to, and then the wheels begin. And all of these activity, if you're the recall coordinator managing this, is going to hit you like an avalanche. And you need to be prepared in advance for this. And as Duncan points out here, this is an interesting wrinkle, and this is true for SQF and other things as well, is if you are certified to a
GFSI, Bryan.
What's that?
It's a requirement in GFSI. All of the standards are asking people to report that to the certification body, but that doesn't mean that they're asking you to report that to the authority.
No, it doesn't. And the only reason I bring this up is this is something that people miss. If you have a recall and you fail to notify your certification body and that standard on that recall, they're going to pull your certification.
Yes. Yep.
They're not going to be happy about that at all. So that's one of those little things that gets missed out there relative to that. So FDA is now involved with this recall. Odds are, within a very short period of time, you're going to have investigators at your plant. And they're going to be performing the investigation and figuring out the different activities. And one of these, once they've decided the seriousness, this is going to activate FDA's response. And to your point, they will ask you if it's a serious situation, Jose, okay, we want you to recall this product. FDA is being nice, right? Under FSMA, FDA has authority to force a recall, but they don't want to do that unless they have to. They are saying, we want you to recall this product. If you fail to comply, and we've seen issues like this. There was an ice cream manufacturer in Florida who refused, and FDA had to take the next step in that to get injunctions and all these things, right? But FDA doesn't like to do this because these things take time. And in the meantime, there's adulterated product in the marketplace making people sick, and FDA wants that out of the market now. And one of those key things that FDA will ask about is how much product was manufactured. They want you, and this is why we need to do tests of our system. So if you come back to FDA, Jose, and say, okay, we made 15,000 cases under this particular lot code, and FDA will come into the plant to verify that that is true. So let's say, for example, you have rework or things that are being added back into the product that expand the recall. FDA is looking for those things. But if you tell FDA 15,000 cases were manufactured that are in question that we need to recall, and later on FDA learns that, well, actually it's 20,000 cases, and oh, we forgot about this other product that's in this warehouse, it's 25,000 cases. FDA's confidence in you is going to go down very, very fast. And they're going to say, hey, you know what? Just recall it all because you don't know what you're doing. And we want this out of the marketplace. Which then gets back to effectiveness checks. What are those?
So one of the requirements in the regulation recall program, and by the way, remember that your recall plan, assuming that you have at least one hazard that requires a preventive control, significant hazard, as soon as you have at least one of those, the recall plan is a preventive control. It's not an element that is separated from everything else. So you need whatever is the preventive control plus the recall plan. Okay, that's regulatory background. Now, effectiveness checks. Well, it's part of the FDA strategy. You are supposed to have effectiveness checks. What is an effectiveness check? Well, number one, make sure that you can identify exactly all of the product coming in, all of your products in the process, and everything that you are shipping out. Why? Because that identification system is going to help you to identify what was the lot or lots that were affected by whatever was the deviation in your process.
Right.
Okay. And positively identify that quantity and make sure that you start daily calls to all of the customers that receive that product to make sure that you pull the product out of the market. And when I'm saying you, of course, if you ship the product and let's say US Foods is receiving the product and then they need to start their own recall, that's fine. That's fine. You just need to communicate to them, hey, lot number 1, 2, 3 is adulterated. As soon as you receive the product from your own recall program, make sure that you store it, and when you have everything, you ship it back. Or you destroy the product and you send me evidence of destruction or something like that.
Right.
But the communication of the lot code and what to do, the final deposition of the product must be part of the communication. You don't have that in GFSI.
No.
That is only FDA.
Yeah. Well, and also, right, this shows the fluid nature of how these situations work as well. So FDA, and this is one of the most tedious parts of a recall, is tracking down all the product and removing it from commerce, and depending upon the risk, destroying it. So let's say, for example, to Jennifer's point, you have these contaminated frozen vegetables with listeria, right? Very serious class 1 situation. You just can't throw those in the dumpster, because somebody might go, ooh, look at this, free vegetables, right? And dig them out of the garbage and get sick. So you need to arrange in advance, okay, where are sanitary landfills that I can send my product to? And I may need certificates of destruction to show FDA that this product was destroyed. And in some situations, these sanitary landfills will take caterpillars and run them over the product and have pictures of that showing that it's been completely destroyed and buried. You may need to do that. So you need to understand those things and have those things all set up in advance. So this point here kind of brings about what we're talking about. Well, is this mechanism, as I just said, Jose, is fluid, right? Not everything that you would think is a class 1 recall may be a class 1 recall. And you did a very interesting analysis of this. So let's pull this dude up here and go through this. There we go. And again, so this is, I pulled this piece up here, the data, just to show all the information that you got for this. Yes. And again, this is the source, foodindustrycouncil.com, amazing source that I put in the chat. So let's take a look at this, Jose. I'll go through the file here, and then you tell me what to do.
Okay. So
you've earned your weekend. So if you're new to the chat, first of all, welcome. Pull up the feed and join us for an hour. We're going to be
that is a recording.
And what you're going to notice here,
that's fine.
The presentation is
maybe it's in the mixer, Bryan.
A PowerPoint presentation where we read a bunch of crap to you. A conversation.
Yeah.
And I am
what is going on here? I'll pull that out.
Wow. And join me for a discussion around these type of topics. And we are here.
I have no idea.
Also, like this in your mixer.
Answer your question. So as Cheryl knows, good morning, Cheryl.
Something is there.
Here is what
something is here, and I'm really
happy that you're here. So if you're new to the chat, you're not going to recognize.
Well, this is really weird. Okay, hold on here. Let me.
All food safety consulting.
So we can't do that.
I love having on the chat because he's so knowledgeable. So how you doing today, Jose?
Oh, hold on.
It's a time loop.
Yeah, who knows? Okay, but you know what? That's fine. This is live, so these things happen. So we're good to go. Okay, so look,
okay, at least it stopped. Okay.
When we were talking about the classification of the recalls, something that came to my mind was, well, if we now understand which are the things that we need to go through to determine the classification, my question was, what is the difference between a class 1 and class 2 if we're talking about allergens? Why? Because the severity of the allergens for anyone that is allergic to any of them is going to be basically the same. You know, if the person is very sensitive to that, the person may die from an anaphylactic shock. That's it. Mm-hmm. So in a risk assessment, once we determine the severity, that severity is not likely to change. Okay. The only thing that we need to deal with is the likelihood, trying to reduce that likelihood in order to make sure that we reduce the risk by reducing likelihood. Now, what I did is I went to Sean's webpage and I downloaded all of the recalls between January of 2020 and I believe it was July of this year. You know, the last 2.5 years, to make sure that we are using the most current data for these elements. And what I did is I was trying to identify how many recalls are class 1 and how many recalls are class 2 to see if that statement of the, the factors that are going to influence the decision about the classification makes sense. And I will say that I'm not 100% convinced. I don't have any problem actually if it's a class 1 or class 2 because I know that it's a hazard.
Right.
I already know that the product is adulterated, and that is enough. I don't care if the product is adulterated with a little piece of hair or with a huge amount of quantity of Listeria monocytogenes or large quantities of the toxin of the Clostridium botulinum, and a lot of people are going to die. The product is adulterated anyways. That's my point. However, in this analysis, what I did is gross. In all of those 660 records, okay, there are 42% of class 1 and 58% of class 2. Okay, just to give you a quick overview. And if this graph, the first graph that Bryan is showing there, you have organized the recalls by allergen. And as you can tell, the first one, which is milk, is the biggest one. Okay, most of the recalls are being performed because there is a problem. I'm not sure right now if the problem was labeling or if the problem was cross-contact, but milk was involved in that issue.
Right. And so the three colors here then, so for everybody, the blue, orange, and gray, what do those mean?
Okay. So the orange one, I believe it's, hold on, let me check something that I have here.
That looks like class 1.
The orange one is the class 1, and the blue and the gray is a class 2. So for milk, most of the recalls are class 2 and not class 1. And that was surprising to me because I said, well, if the product is going to be consumed by someone that is allergic to milk, I will say that all of these recalls are going to be class 1. Yeah. But remember that one of the factors is to determine if people have been sick by this. So if we don't have people sick and it was caught very, early in the process of distribution, well, the severity is not there. So most likely that is going to make that recall a class 2.
Right. And this gets back to, and can you see my cursor here as I move around?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mentioned about the classification, the factors that you use for classifying food.
Right. And this again goes back to why it's so important to have robust systems in place, because you may be able to show FDA that based upon the particulars of your situation and the data that you have, that it should be a class 2 instead of a class 1.
Yeah. Yeah. And then milk is the biggest one. And then the next one is tree nuts. And the next one is soy, which tree nut and soy, it's kind of a close. And then you have wheat, which is close to the other two. And then you have eggs, peanuts, fish, sesame.
And then the shellfish taking a career.
Oh, and the last one is crustacean shellfish.
And you notice what's not here is coconut. No coconut.
Well, hold on. Coconut, in theory, is supposed to be part of the tree nuts. Okay. You're laughing. I'm laughing too, but
it's coconut. Yeah, it's a pet peeve of mine. Yeah, coconut is not even a tree. Right? It's a grass.
Okay, so in the second portion, what I did is this. So let me organize all of these data, to try to understand which will be the order of severity for a class 1 recall. And it is amazing, but all of the class 1 recalls, all of them for crustacean shellfish are class 1. And this is the reason why the first bar is the crustacean shellfish. Mm-hmm. So if you guys are manufacturing crustacean shellfish, that means that 99% you're going to have a class 1 recall.
Right. Well, and from your background, you got a lot of experience of that in your past, right? So you were very involved in that industry.
Yep, because it is very allergic ingredient. And then after the crustacean shellfish, you have the eggs, and then you have peanuts, and then you have fish, milk, tree nuts, soy, wheat, and sesame at last. That is the order of the allergens for a class 1 recall. The following chart is I did the same thing, but for class 2. So in class 2, the number 1 is sesame. And you're going to say, hold on, Jose, sesame just became an allergen January 1st of this year.
Yeah.
And it's already number 1. Why? Well, because people is not used to it and they forget. Mm-hmm. Most likely these sesame issues are labeling and not necessarily cross contact.
Exactly.
This is part of the analysis. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then after the sesame, we have wheat, soy, tree nuts, milk, fish, peanuts, eggs, and crustacean shellfish is 0 because all of those recalls are class 1.
Interesting.
What about that? That's amazing.
Yeah. And so, and again, right, and I think this data that you pulled up, Jose, for our talk today here and put together, and thank you for doing this, is that it's not all cut and dry, right? It's going to be on the particulars of your situation. So just off the top of my head, let's say sesame let's say that you have sesame powder that you're putting in something that a consumer cannot see. And it's no way of knowing that if you're allergic to that it's there. Probably going to be a class 1 versus let's say that you're a baker and you're producing buns and you accidentally got a few sesame seeds on the outside of some buns where the consumer can see it. FDA may say, oh, okay, yeah, you need to bring it back, but that's a class 2 recall, not a class 1. But to your point, you're going to react the same, right? You're going to still be bringing that product back and dealing with it and the market withdrawals and everything that we're talking about. You still need to do everything associated with this. It's just it's going to be classified differently.
Yep. So this was an amazing eye-opener to me, looking at these data and analyzing the characteristics that we need to use in order to determine the classification of the recall. And I'm going to say this again. This is not a requirement in GFSI, guys. If you don't have these, you're done.
Yeah. So fantastic data. Thank you again for putting that together. And this data will be available in my group here that we put together for the Food Safety Chat database. So I will be attaching that in here, and that'll be in here by the end of the day. And just in case you don't have that link, here is that link for everybody, so you can go check that out. All of that information is in here for, guys, Jose, we're coming up now on about 3 years of chats that we've been doing here every Friday. So all this information is available for people who subscribe to that. And Duncan's got a good comment here. Let's see what you think about this. So I bet milk is included as a direct addition or as part of a compound ingredient for a greater volume of product. Absolutely. So it's kind of like the flour example we were using, because with milk, you have the milk itself, you have derivatives, whey protein concentrate, caseinates, lactose, all kinds of other things. And this gets back into allergen labeling, right? If someone goofs up and says contains caseinate, and people don't know that caseinate is a milk product.
Yes.
Number one, right? That's mislabeling, because you're required under the regulations to label that as a declared allergen. And if you forget that, boop, you have a recall. And and in that particular example, my guess is FDA would probably, kind of like our sesame flour example, FDA would call that a class 1 because there's a milk allergen present and consumers are unable to identify it.
Yeah. I already started seeing, Bryan, recalls, because look at this one. The allergen was identified in the list of ingredients, but it was not identified in the contains statement. What about that?
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's my contention that most allergen recalls are due to administrative problems, right? So not checking your labels, not putting the right packaging in the machinery. In most cases, it's not sanitation failures, it's packaging, information, communication failures that trigger a recall.
Yep.
So to kind of wrap up our topic here as well. So a big chunk of this then, and this can take a year or more to complete, is then following up on the recall, closing out the information, and then talking with your FDA coordinator who's managing this to close the recall. And a lot of times they will wait quite a while to do that. And also remember that because you've had a recall now, you're on FDA's radar screen. Odds are they're going to be scheduling a follow-up inspection with you at some point in the future to make sure that everything is working properly now.
Yep. Exactly right.
Yep. So I'll leave you the last word on this for a summary then, Jose. What would you like people to kind of take away from this then?
So, in my opinion, we are so, I don't want to say this as an extreme, but we are kind of blinded by GFSI. I don't want to say that GFSI is not right. I believe that GFSI is the best thing that happened to everybody in the world. Let me tell you that as general opinion.
Yeah.
But as the ones that are responsible for the food safety of the facility, the ones that are most responsible, everybody's responsible. We're supposed to understand systems approach. FDA is asking the PCQI and the HACCP team leader, whatever, to develop a food safety program, develop and implement a system. And GFSI is also saying you need a system. So if you do not understand systems in ISO world, you're done. Because most likely you are not going to have the right approach. And I'm going to say that, of course, in my own convenience, but this is a reason why there are consultants out there. Seek for help.
Yep, because you need to, as we've talked about here on the chat here several times today, you need to practice this. Because writing a document and saying, okay, good enough, nope, because only practicing this so that you're prepared for a real world situation is going to work. So with that, my goodness, time flew here today. Thank you again, Jose, for a fantastic chat. And everybody, wow, what a fire hose of information. And thank you for the excellent comments, the amazing questions. We do this for you, and we really, really appreciate you being here and investing an hour of your time every week to be with us for the chat. And so next week, we'll be back on next Friday at the same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next food safety chat. And in the meantime, look at all that you've accomplished this week. Enjoy your weekend. Have a great time. And we will see you back here next Friday. And of course, Jose, always amazing to have you on. Thank you, my friend.
Always a pleasure to be here, Bryan.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you here next Friday.